Rabbi Israel Salanter in 19th century Lithuania saw a servant carrying on her shoulder 2 pails of water. When dinner was ready, Rabbi Salanter washed his hands sparingly. He was asked why he did not use more water, and he replied, "One must not be generous with a mitzvah upon the shoulders of another person." Meanwhile, the Bratislava rabbi said, "Take joy in fulfilling a mitzvah to the point that you will wish for no more reward than the opportunity to fulfill another one." My son Max, having studied at George Brown College's esteemed culinary program, combined with countless hours of practice at home, has developed, pardon my bragging, into a remarkable baker of bread. It's fascinating to watch him at work. His methodology and employment of ingredients and utensils are amazing to observe. It's all precise and down to a science. And did I mention the refreshing of his starter the day before? Everything requires patience. The results, however, as my family and I experienced them following our Hamotzi blessing on Erev Shabbat, make it all worth it. Well, what then is the connection between bread baking and our embrace of both Shabbat and Torah? It's a single verse from our Torah portion, Parshat Bo, which reads, "You shall watch over the matzot, because on this day I brought you out of the land of Egypt, and you shall watch over this day for all generations as a law forever." As well as the requirement that we consume matzah during our Pesach Sedarim and throughout the festival 7 days, there's the understanding, most vital of all, that in our preparation of matzah, we take heed not to allow fermentation, that there be no rising of dough, no excess, no fattening, no enriching of the mixture, just matzah. In other words, in preparing what our Haggadah refers to as the bread of affliction, one must take the opposite approach employed by my son Max and proud bakers everywhere. But there is a larger purpose, a purpose surpassing our recollection of the Exodus narrative of our ancestors in Torah. It's more than just about envisioning the haste with which our ancestors, under God's instruction, prepared their final meal in Egypt, knowing that the next day would bring them the deliverance they had waited for more than 4 centuries. It is about opportunity. It is about seizing a moment. It is about refusing to pass up the occasion to fulfill a mitzvah, a good deed, act of charity, or expression of kindness. The great Torah commentator Rashi in 12th century France wrote, "If the dough rises, let one knead it with cold water." And Rabbi Josiah says, "Do not read hamatzot, but hamitzvot." Just as one does not let the unleavened bread leaven, so too one does not let the commandment leaven. If the opportunity to perform a commandment comes, do so immediately. The Hasidic sage Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz, 18th century Ukraine, observed, just as matzah, which has been permitted to ferment, may not be used, and just as one who eats such is punishable by karat, expulsion from her, his people, so too there is punishment for one who allows a mitzvah, to ferment and does not perform it at its proper time. And Rabbi Moshe Luzzatto in 18th century Italy, in his work, The Paths of the Upright, added, prior to the commencement of a mitzvah, a person must not delay. Rather, when its time arrives, or when the opportunity presents itself, or what enters one's mind, one must react speedily to seize the mitzvah and do it. One must not procrastinate, for there is no greater danger. Every moment can bring with it some hindrance to the fulfillment of a good deed. Carpe diem, a fixture of our vocabulary that literally translates as pluck the day, but more colloquially, it encourages us to make the most of the present moment with little thought to the future. In our Jewish view of the world, these words give resonance and amplify our fulfillment of the mitzvot. Like our ancestors on the eve and morning of their redemption from servitude, we must not tarry in carrying out Judaism's commandments. We must not linger in engaging tzedakah, an act of justice. We must not dilly-dally in undertaking chesed, an act of kindness. And we must not postpone our performance of tikkun, an act of repairing our perpetually broken world. Like the dough with which we are vigilant so as to prevent its rising to become leavened bread, so must we not waver in guarding and fulfilling the mitzvot whenever the chance to do so is presented to us. Israeli rabbi and teacher Zalman Melamed writes, this is what's meant by the quality of zerzut, the eagerness in the fulfillment of one's obligations. Those who possess zerzut, the sages tell us, race to fill the commandments. A person should always hurry to do mitzvot, even on Shabbat, when one is commanded to rest. When a mitzvah presents itself, don't put it off. We're reminded that when guests arrived at the tent of our ancestor Abraham, he hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, hurry, 3 measures of the finest flour. Knead it and make rolls. Abraham ran to the cattle and chose a tender calf. He gave it to a young man who rushed to prepare it. Everything was done with zerazut, fervor and speed, to fulfill the mitzvah of welcoming guests in its entirety. And a similar theme described in our Israel Passover Haggadah involves God's words to Moses, place your hand onto your chest. And Moses did so, and his hand became covered with leprosy. This was a sign to Moses that one must not procrastinate in the matter of a mitzvah, particularly when it involves aiding one's fellow human beings. For putting one's hands onto chest is a sign of laziness. That being said, and as we proceed into 2022, when will you encourage the Jewish life and learning of our youth? When will you respond to needs of those who are homebound, hospitalized, in mourning, or experiencing economic deprivation? When will you push back against the forces of intolerance and suspicion? When will you reach across faith lines and seek to embrace those whose spiritual life differs from yours? And on the subject of mitzvot, I always find myself circling back to the teaching of Holy Blossom's esteemed Rabbi Dov Marmer, who imparted to us that the genuine reward for a mitzvah is simply knowing that we have performed one. In anticipation of this most fitting of rewards, may we not delay our fulfillment of mitzvot, and like our ancestors Abraham and Sarah, may we not hinder nor fail to accelerate the unfolding of more inclusive and caring communities. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will.